Good morning, everybody. I like to journey through the Gospels when we find ourselves in the season of Lent. If I had any choice, we wouldn't have had a harvest festival last Sunday, because I like to do a harvest festival before Ash Wednesday. I don't want anything to distract us from the footsteps of Jesus, for how his ministry and mission unfolded for 3 significant years. And of course, even to this day, I find the Gospels very fascinating. I think it has something to do with the fact that they are so similar and so the same. And of course, we have the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And my first problem with that is that Mark isn't placed first in the New Testament. If the Gospels had been put chronologically, Mark would open the New Testament, because Mark was written a considerable time before Matthew. I'm always interested to see how the Gospel authors arrange their Gospel works. For not in every Gospel are the events placed in the same order. In fact, John, who's not a synoptic, uses a very different chronological order for the stories of Jesus. I think I have mentioned to you before that there is some material unique to particular Gospels. So for instance, the story of Mary and Martha we find only in Luke's Gospel. The story of the Good Samaritan, although we just half accept that it would be found in Mark, Matthew, and Luke, is actually only included by Luke. Most of Mark's material appears in the other Gospels, about 90% of it. But Mark has 1 or 2 things that are unique to him. The same with Matthew, the same with Luke. You see, their focus points were different, what they tried to emphasize. So Luke, for instance, goes out of his way to emphasize Christ's ministry to the poor. So there are lots of accounts of Jesus being in the back streets of the towns and cities, meeting with the underdogs of the society of his day. Matthew's main aim was to prove to the Jews of the day that Jesus was the Messiah. And that is why more than in any other gospel do we have Matthew quoting from the Old Testament. Matthew clearly thought that if he quotes the Old Testament all the time, it would become proof that the Jews were needing to see that Jesus was the Christ of God. There's one very important line which Jesus speaks, which we find only in Matthew. And I don't know why. Perhaps Matthew was the only one who had access to this material. Maybe Mark and Luke didn't have this particular document or the particular book from which it was found. But there are other accounts that happen in Jesus' life that all 4 include, let alone only the 3 synoptics. Like the entry into Jerusalem, for instance. The feeding of the 5,000 is not only found in 1 or 2 of the Gospels, but in all 4, even in John, who wrote much later. But today's passage that I'm unpacking for us is only found in Matthew. And once I've stopped wondering why, perhaps I can comment on it. Matthew 11, as from verse 25. At that time Jesus said, I praise you, Father, it's a prayer, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned. You revealed to little children. Yes, Father, for this was your good pleasure. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. And Jesus then drops this bombshell. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Here we have the only invitation that we ever have known of by somebody claiming to have the universal secret of what every person needs. It's very bold and very brave of Jesus to say this. It must have taken a lot of courage for him to claim being the one who has the answer for our human dilemmas and for our human desperation. I always like to put things in context. When I prepare a sermon, I don't only read the passage that has wrapped itself around my heart, I also check out the passages that lead up to that passage, and I read a little on to see what passages follow the one that I am dealing with. And it's very clear that when one looks at this passage, you will see that it's not at the start of Jesus' ministry. He had already traveled quite a few miles, and he had already met a whole lot of people. The passage that I spoke on last Sunday is 2 chapters before this, Matthew chapter 9. And that was quite a haunting passage, for we had the image of Jesus being on his travels, up and down the country, even once or twice through Samaria. He crossed the Jordan also every now and then, found himself in the Decapolis, which was the 10 Greek cities on the other side of the river. And so Jesus knew the background of these people. He sometimes came across celebrities, sometimes came across people in power, people in positions of influence and authority. But he also met people at rock face, people who on a daily basis had to strive to survive. People who had to scratch together some means in order to have food to eat and clothes to wear. Jesus came eyeball to eyeball with the average person in his society, and that is why he gives us that summarized statement in Matthew chapter 9 where he says, I can see that people are milling around like, what did I say on Sunday? Like sheep without a shepherd. And Matthew tells us that Jesus thought they looked quite harassed and helpless. And Matthew says then that Jesus had compassion on them. So in Jesus' mind, his experience of the people of the day was very intense. In my mind, I can see him meeting with the laboring folk, people tilling the lands, people worried if the harvest was going to be good enough so that the farmer can pay them properly. I see Jesus chatting to prostitutes, trying to find out what makes them tick and why they ended up at the corner of the street. I can see Jesus coming eyeball to eyeball with widows. Widows who had lost their husband, in other words, their breadwinner, like the widow in Mark chapter 4, who had only a 16th of a penny to give. Remember that? Jesus built relationships with these kind of people, the helpless ones, the hopeless ones, the desperate ones, the sad ones, the fearful ones. That was his business. And so when he extends perhaps the most endearing invitation of all time, it doesn't come lightly but seriously. On this day where we have Matthew 11, I don't think Jesus woke up from bed that morning saying to himself, I think I'm going to put out the acute invitation for everybody and they can decide if they're going to RSVP or not. It looks like a lot of thought and a lot of reflection and a lot of prayer went into this statement that Jesus now extends in Matthew 11, verse 28, when he says, "Come to me, all you who are burdened and weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." I don't for one second think that Jesus wanted to sound clever, or that he was pretending to care. I think that the rough time that he had on the ground with people in the dusty roads of Jerusalem made him come to this conclusion, where you could no longer keep his mouth shut, but had to offer a solution for all our human tribulations and troubles. Let's dissect the invitation a little bit. Let's look at the words and see what they mean. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I think the first word in that sentence that my eye has to fall on is probably the word come. Probably the word which calls for action. The word which implies, if you don't come, I can't help you. Now, I have been preaching for 24 years. I know I look like that can't be possible because I look quite young for my 42 years. But I started at 18 in the year 2000, and it looks like all that I have tried to do now for almost a quarter century is wanting people to come, to leave their comfort zones, to leave behind whatever holds them in their chair, and to come to Jesus. I have often in sermons spoke the words of that old song, "There is room at the cross for you. Though millions have come, there is still room for one. There is room at the cross for you." One of my deceased grandmother's favorites. You see, there can be lots and lots of room at the foot of the cross for you, but if you don't come, your life cannot be changed, it cannot be healed, it cannot be transformed. If there's one thing that I have seen about Jesus, is that he is a gentleman. And that his Holy Spirit will not force his way into your life unless you give him an opening to do so. I have also often referred to Paul's words in my sermons where the apostle says, "Today is the day of your salvation. For I have seen people sitting proudly in the seats in front of me, resisting the invitation." Either they don't believe that transformation is possible, perhaps my sermon wasn't convincing enough, but perhaps they need a little bit more persuasion. Or maybe it's their pride getting in the way, their ego. Maybe they're worried about what their husband would say, or their wife would say, or their child would say, or the person sitting next to them in church will say. It's not going to be long now when I start calling people to the front for prayer, and maybe even dare I say, to commit themselves to Christ or recommit their lives to Christ, if it's not the first time. And I cannot at this stage afford to worry about time. I can't be bothered about what those I serve with on the board or on my eldership say. I have a mission here. And I cannot let it slip through my fingers the opportunity of making sure that you have a chance to come while there is still time. Maybe I'm singing to the gallery this morning. Maybe you have committed your life to Christ and maybe you walk with Him closely. But I just have a suspicion that there are people in this church who need to actually leave behind their old lives and physically come to Jesus.
That's right. That's right. Now,
and at some stage, I'm going to have to remind people that unless they come and throw themselves on Jesus, He won't be able to help them or to save them. There's something about this coming thing that could be a bit disturbing. Because God has set everything in place already. God has put together the master plan of salvation through Jesus. The price has been paid. The grave has been conquered. All things have been done. Jesus Himself says so in John chapter 19, verse 30. It is finished. The only part of the puzzle missing for some people, perhaps even for somebody here this morning, is that they haven't come. They haven't said yes to this invitation. The second thing I need to pay a little bit of attention to is that not only just does Jesus say come, He says come to me. And that makes a huge difference, because I needed to know all along that this is personal, that this is intimate, that this is between Jesus and me. Don't you think it's rather nice that He doesn't say, come to a particular religion, or come to a particular kind of church? You see, when Jesus calls us to Himself, He doesn't call us to a system. He calls us into a relationship. Abundant life cannot be provided through a system. Abundant life cannot be given to you by a church, no matter the denomination. Abundant life can only be found in a life-giving walk with Jesus. So for Jesus, this is a very personal thing. And we see it in His ministry. For every now and then we find Him in a chat with an individual, and it's as if the entire world doesn't exist. We have Jesus and the demon-possessed man in Mark chapter 5. The way they talk, it's like no one else is around. We have Jesus and the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4. Jesus and the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8. Jesus and the blind Bartimaeus in Luke chapter 19. Remember that day where the disciples wanted to intervene and said to the poor blind man sitting at the gate of Jericho, don't bother Jesus, you're being a nuisance. And Jesus said, it looks like you've got this whole thing other way around. You are being a nuisance. Let me reach out to this man. There's a personal thing that Jesus has got going on with individuals. an intimate relationship that He's after with every person. And His ministry speaks volumes of that. He calls people to Himself. Thank you very much. And so when I extend this invitation on whatever given Sunday, it won't be me calling you to come. I speak on somebody's behalf who's infinitely greater than myself. Jesus the Christ. Come to me, He says. And when He says, come to me, what He means is, come to me, the one who can bind up your broken wounds. Come to me, the one who can dry away your tears. Come to me, the one who can wipe out all your sin. Come to me, the one who can give you the key to everlasting life. So when we come to Him, we don't go to a Jewish carpenter who lived and died 2,000 years ago. No. We come to the one who is the way, the truth, and the life. We come to the one who is the life to live and the truth to know and the way to go. And I wasn't going to tell you this, it's just come to my mind now. I cannot tell you that the actual pain that I go through when I see somebody living without Christ. Some of them are even church people. They're experts at religion, but there's no relationship. I don't think there's anything in the world that brings me that much suffering than seeing people living without Jesus. Come to me, He says. He calls us to Himself. All you who are heavy burdened and tired. Now there's a connotation to the kind of tiredness that Jesus is talking about. I don't think He talks about how tired we get after having traveled a little bit or having had a road trip and you get to your destination and you are feeling a bit exhausted, or having run a mile or 5, or having done some exercises, or can I take the risk of saying after one has cleaned one's house? I don't know that feeling because I never clean my house. I'll have to speak to Letitia, my very, very precious domestic. It looks like Jesus is talking about something more profound here. Something deeper. The tiredness that life can bring. The tiredness which is accompanied sometimes by hopelessness and doubt, even uncertainty. The tiredness that makes you feel fear deep within. Who can honestly say in this world in its current state, who can currently say that they are without any burden, that they are without any heaviness, that they are without any tiredness, that they never feel weary, that they never feel like, gosh, they cannot go on? I find that trying to live in South Africa has a particular challenge. I think when I look at the news, I feel really, really, really weary. I feel weary because we live in a country where so much is wrong. And of course, we who follow Jesus, we believe that things should be different. That no country should be this messed up. And so in me there's always this pining, and that's why I'm exhausted more often than not. There is this unsatisfied pining to see a different society out there. But it looks like it's only going to come when God brings in the new heaven and the new So, to some extent, there will always be some kind of weariness in us. It's caused by that longing in a Christian to see a different world out there. Do you know what I'm saying? When I stand here on a Sunday and the church is lacquer full, and it's like there's an ocean of faces in front of me, I often get that sense of the problems that people go through. Problems in their marriage, problems with their children, problems with their health. I mean, the list is endless, isn't it? Can you imagine a greater honor for a preacher than that of sharing the words of Jesus? This one-of-a-kind invitation, saying to all those who feel weary, saying to all those who feel burdened, to all those who are being crippled by their fear, who are being consumed by their worries, there's actually help available. There's actually hope on offer. There's actually healing for your sins. It is a privilege that I will not exchange for all the tea in China. I've done it been doing it for 24 years, and I want to do it till the day of my very last breath. To repeatedly remind you of this kind and gentle invitation, that you can come to Him with your weariness and with your heavy burdenedness, and that He will meet you in your need, and that you will not be disappointed. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I skipped that word "or." I should have made that one of the points of the sermon, for that is the word so close to Methodists, because that's the word that John and Charles Wesley insisted on using in their proclamation of the gospel, the inclusivity of Christ's message. But the last word I think we must just talk about a little bit before I end is the word rest. Just like I don't believe that there's somebody who can put up their hand and say, I don't ever feel heavy. I don't have any burdens, Bevan. There's not a thing in the world that is currently bothering me. Just like I don't think there's anybody who can tell me that without it being a lie, so I also don't think there's anybody who can say, I don't ache for rest for my heart. I don't desire peaceful sleep at night. I don't desire wanting to live freely for the days I have left. If it's rest you're after, if it's peace you are looking for, I am telling you today where to go. I am telling you to run towards the open arms of Jesus. There you will find rest. There you will find peace for your soul. There you will find grace that never runs dry. There you will find love which comes without any questions asked. Do you really want to put yourself through a life without Jesus? Do you really want to deny yourself that kind of rest? Do you really want to deprive yourself of that kind of sweet living? Jesus looked into the tear-stained faces in the crowds, into the faces racked by worry, and pain. He saw in front of him in the multitudes, he saw the crippled and the blind and the deaf. And he saw how high people's stress levels were. And he saw all those who hadn't slept well the night before. He sensed people's guilt, people's rejection, people's disappointments, people's regrets. And so he could no longer postpone this extraordinary invitation. And I don't know if it's just me, but I imagine him to be speaking at the top of his voice when he said this, wanting the maximum amount of people to hear him. Come to me, he says. All of you who ticks one of these boxes. If you are weary, if you are heavy laden, if you are burdened, if you are feeling guilty, if you are battling with loss, if you are worried about where your next meal will come from, if you need help with your relationships, if it's some kind of sickness issue that you can't solve by yourself, come to me today and I will give you rest. It baffles me that some people still postpone and procrastinate. That some people still produce some kind of excuse for why they don't want to come to Jesus. I'm going to be spending the rest of my life telling people that he's worth a shot. I have not ever come across anybody who gave their life to Jesus and was sorry afterwards. Come today. You have nothing to lose, but seemingly everything to gain. Amen.